Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I hope that you are well, and as folks continue to come into this virtual space, we're going to prepare to get started. Today, we are discussing part 2 of our As We Are webinar series. Today, we're focused on how the pandemic shapes our experience of coming together. We're happy that you're here and that you'll get a chance to listen to and learn from our panelists. This webinar is part of a much larger series of webinars whose purpose has been to deliver COVID-19 education and resources through the lens of the local faith community. And as I said, it's part 2 of a kind of mini series focused on the mental health impact of the pandemic on local congregations. If you would like to watch any of our past webinars, they can be found at churchhealth.org/FC. I promise it's a treasure trove of information to help you think intentionally and critically about the decisions you can make for your community. There is, of course, no need to take too many notes or write down that web address, because after this webinar, each of you will be receiving an email follow-up with a link to a recording of this webinar and a summary of what we will be discussing today. Which will also have that direct link to our website as well. So I'm going to stop talking. I'm going to ask our founder and CEO, Dr. Scott Morris, to welcome us and open us in prayer. After that, I'll introduce our panelists and we'll get started learning about how the pandemic continues to impact our ability to gather as people of faith. Dr. Morris.
Great, thank you, Joshua. So in March of 2020, that is well over a year ago now. We at Church Health just sensed that the impending pandemic, not fully aware of what was ahead of us, but we knew that this was going to be a true challenge to the spiritual well-being of our own selves, but for the entire community. So we began connecting the churches with the belief that the church would play a significant role as our community lived through what we didn't know was going to happen. I think what we didn't really know in March of 2020 is how, I don't know if the word's devastating, but we could at least say challenging, the pandemic was going to be on our congregations. And where we are right now is, in my mind, a great opportunity for us to, in some ways, rethink church. Give us the chance to ask, what does the church moving forward look like? And so while I think many congregations are struggling mightily, either financially or just with not sure what their next step is, this webinar here is intended to sort of really have that conversation over how do we re-engage what God has called us to do. So I'm really eager to hear what our four faith leaders have to say together. But before we do so, let me just call us together in prayer. So let us pray together. Our God, when all else fails, you still are God. We, your people, pray that we will open our ears to hear you speak to us in a time of change and opportunity. In the midst of a world filled with suffering, we know that your healing balm is there for us to taste and see. Be with us today. May our conversation be rich with the words you inspire in us. We pray in the name of the God who sits high, but looks low. All right, back to you, Joshua.
Thank you, Dr. Morris, for opening us up, and a special thank you again to all of our panelists for your willingness to share your experience and expertise with us today. I'd like to begin by introducing you to all those who are gathered with us online. We have with us the Reverend Dorothy Wells, who was a practicing attorney for 18 years before becoming an Episcopal priest. She previously served as curate of the Church of the Holy Apostles and is now the rector at St. George's Episcopal Church and serves the Episcopal Diocese of West Tennessee in a variety of capacities. We also have with us the Reverend Dr. Jacky Gatliff, who holds a DMin in spiritual formation for ministry leaders, and with her husband has served churches in North Carolina, New Hampshire, and Connecticut. She is director of the congregational care team at Christ Church here in Memphis. We also have with us Dr. Sarita Wilson. She is a chaplain and grief counselor serving as director of spiritual care at Bonheur Children's Hospital in Memphis. She's an ordained elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church and serves as associate minister at the St. Andrew AME Church in Memphis. And finally with us today is Dr. George W. Robertson, the senior pastor of the Second Presbyterian Church. Before coming to Second in Memphis, he served congregations in Augusta, Georgia, and St. Louis, Missouri, and as adjunct professor at Covenant Theological Seminary. And he's currently a council member for the Gospel Coalition. We have a great plethora of expertise and experience here with us today. I'm excited for this conversation. And as we begin, because this is part of a two-part mini-series, Dr. Wilson, can you briefly recap for us the wide impact the pandemic has had on mental health for those who weren't able to watch part one?
Absolutely. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for having us. I think this forum is very important for us as people of faith because we don't talk about mental illness enough, and we don't talk about how it impacts people of faith in different congregations. And so I think on the last webinar, we talked a lot about what mental health in the congregation looks like. And we talked about the fact that the pandemic has widely impacted everybody. We've seen increases in anxiety and depression across all age groups, across all demographics, but particularly for people of color. We've seen an increase in suicidal ideation, even in our young people. I think the age for suicide and suicidal ideation is getting younger and younger. And just overall, anxiety has increased, hopelessness has increased, grief has increased, be it the loss of the physical loss of someone you love, or just be it the loss of income, the loss of social interactions, the social spacing we've had to do. There's just been a lot of hopelessness. So we have seen an uptick in mental health all across the board. It is no respecter of faith. It is no respecter of age or demographics. It's no respecter of any one group, but some groups have been more deeply impacted than others.
Thank you. We do know that as we enter into the month of June, that it's been well over a year since most congregations have gathered for the rituals and routines that give shape and guidance to congregational life. And even for those who have begun to meet sort of cautiously in person, still isn't quite the same. More than a year since congregations have been able to meet regularly for all the programming that comes along with a robust congregational life. And so this is a question I'd love to hear Reverend Wells and Reverend Robertson respond to first. How have you seen the loss of these gathering opportunities affect the mental health of your members?
George, I don't know if you want to go first or not.
I'll defer to you, Dorothy.
People who are used to gathering in community together feel the loss of that community. And we see that, particularly among some of our seniors who live in senior residences, who for a time really were kind of isolated from family and from friends and from lots of things. Online worship, which we were offering, of course, through the entirety of the pandemic, is not the same. It doesn't replace just being able to be present with people and to be able to grieve with people, to share the emotions that we're all feeling with others. We're seeing more folks getting back to worship now. We've actually been back in worship for some time with obviously lots of COVID protocols. We're seeing more people coming back into church, and we're beginning our fall programming, hoping that we're going to be seeing even more folks returning come fall, as long as infection rates obviously stay down in our community. But it's been a real loss. It's been a real loss for folks.
We've experienced the same, and especially, as Dorothy said, among our senior members who were, I think, the most tragic thing I witnessed and experienced was people dying alone, people suffering and dying alone. I had a pastor die very early in the pandemic, and he suffered and died mostly not away from medical professionals, of course, but from his family and the closest friends. So I think part of what we are seeing is the delayed toll that's taken on families too. I just had another colleague, a pastoral colleague, who has had to take a significant break from ministry. He was starting a new ministry, but his father contracted COVID and suffered and died with it alone. And then my pastoral colleague got COVID and couldn't do his father's funeral. And the convergence of those two things in his life have really knocked his legs out from under him. He's going to be months before he gets back to normal. So there's an example of an older portion of our older part of our community. There's a younger member of our community, and the separation, the inability to touch, to be touched, to look somebody in the eye, those things that we've been in denial of for so long, that we can get along just fine virtually. The bankruptcy of our Platonism, of our Cartesian divide between body and soul, is really being exposed. That we have to be in each other's presence, and that we need physical touch. We need whatever that mysterious power is that occurs when we're in each other's presence. And in our Christian tradition, we'd say the Spirit communes with Himself.
Yeah.
We're dealing with that. I'd say quickly, one other thing that I'm finding is that that I'm having a lot of meetings for mediation and reconciliation, and it's a lot of petty stuff. I mean, there's some serious things, but a lot of it is petty. They're petty things that have been allowed to fester and build and become much bigger. And they're things that would have been dealt with earlier, because we would have been forced to deal with them. We would have said, oh my goodness, I'm going to be in the same pew with them on Sunday. I've got to deal with this. Or I'm going to be in the cubicle with them. And without that creative tension of being forced to be in the same place, these relational outages have multiplied. So I think we're going to be dealing with a lot of stuff for a long time. But however, I'm very grateful that we can finally deal with it in person. I had, for the first time, had two people in my office yesterday, two staff people, who were at each other's throats for a long time. But yesterday was the first time we could get them in the same place, because of some health complications and whatnot. And within an hour, they were hugging and forgiving each other. But they've had this tension for months. Yeah. So yes, we're dealing with a lot.
Well, I'd love to hear if there's anything you guys would like to add, Reverend Gatliff and Dr. Wilson, to that question of how this loss of in-person gathering has impacted our mental health. Now we can continue to move on.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add to it. Maybe later we'll talk about just the impact of our ministry team, our pastors and leaders, of how we dealt with that. But no, I mean, I would echo, what's already been said, just the impact for people.
I think same. I would agree with everything that's been said. And just For a lot of people in ministry, ministers, senior pastors, the workload, a lot of times people think it's very easy to do virtual, but it actually takes a lot of planning. It takes a lot of time. You know, you are actually in a lot of capacities working harder for a virtual worship service than you do on the regular basis. And then taking time to ensure that your congregational members are okay and safe, and checking on people, providing pastoral care and support. It's draining. It can be very draining. So I also have seen an uptake in just people in ministry, ministers, pastors, preachers, whose mental health is suffering, who are drained and tired and tapped, and trying to find healthy ways to cope while they keep other people healthy and encouraged. So the feelings of hopelessness have also hit the clergy community, and so seeing a lot of that as well.
We are going to breach that topic a little later in our conversation, but as you speak about the weight of virtual ministry, for many are quickly moving or already have moved into a space where we're returning to in-person worship and programming, right? And we'll be able to bring those back to pre-pandemic levels. But we also know that getting back to what some are calling a normal may not be right for every congregation. And indeed, you know, folks might be feeling that they're being forced too quickly to resume full programming, whatever that may mean. It may not be what some members are looking for. So this is a question I'd love to hear everyone chime in on. Where do you begin in leading a congregation back to an in-person worship experience? And how can faith communities do this while being mindful of those mental health experiences of members that we've just discussed? Where do we begin?
I'll speak to that. I think what we've experienced, we had on-site worship very early, like beginning last July. However, the protocols were so high, you know, the distancing in the pews, the masks for everybody, as when we were leading worship, you know, we're just taking the mask off when we're right there, putting it back on. You know, I called it that it was really a shadow of worship. It wasn't anywhere close to what people had experienced. And so we had, you know, the faithful that were there. And now last Sunday was the first Sunday where people could, if you, in our recommendation, if you've been fully vaccinated, you can come without a mask. But then there were those who were wearing masks. But I think what we're trying to do is that we're approaching it slowly and tenderly. You know, it's just, you know, I think I can speak for the rest of our leadership that, you know, we're not bent on resuming so much as we are as resetting and just saying, okay, let's just, and particularly now in the summer, you kind of have a nice window there of being able to move in slowly and tenderly. And, you know, I got to tell you, last Sunday, it was just really sweet seeing some people that I'd not seen since February a year ago, you know, and it was just like this tender moment of just knowing, just looking at each other and knowing you're different, I'm different. We've been through something and we all know it. But, you know, but I think just my approach and what I think we're doing here is engaging slowly, but doing it very slowly.
I think I would add to that we're also looking for new ways of engaging. We'll continue to have one of our 3 services each week outdoors for folks who are more comfortable being in an outdoor setting. We'll continue to do that. We also recognize that there are some folks who may be experiencing some anxiety issues about even returning to a crowded setting. And for us, that means we're going to continue to have an online presence. Re-engagement can't leave people behind. So we'll continue to have some online offerings of all kinds of things so that we don't leave our loved ones behind. And as Jacky said, it's the slow and intentional and listening, really listening to what folks are communicating to us about their comfort levels so that we can try to be responsive to that.
I think that's the key, listening to your members, knowing what their concerns are, and really knowing your congregation well enough to know that this is what's going to work for the people we serve here. And we cannot compare ourselves to what other churches are doing, what other faith centers are doing. We have to do what's best for our particular church and the needs of our congregation, whether you have an older congregation or a more young adult congregation or whatever it is, meeting those specific needs. And as Dorothy said, really listening to the needs of worship for your community and what those look like for you in your church.
They had that the one thing, and I will be looking to all of you for, is guidance on and best practices for how to honor and affirm the person who's still connecting virtually.
Mm-hmm.
We're so eager. We do have Zoom fatigue and virtual fatigue, but it's still a reality for some people, and by necessity. It'll also be a reality for some people just out of, to be frank, plain laziness. But we can't leave them behind either. We want to keep reaching toward them because they're not, we know theologically and humanly that people are not going to thrive and flourish by remaining disconnected. They need to be with us. So I'm trying to figure out, and asking others. I'd really welcome your input. I'm sure you all are ahead of where we are, but how to project through our virtual outreach that we have that person on the online in mind, how we're thinking for them, how they're really welcomed, and they're not just observing. And I think it'll require some real innovation on our part.
I don't want to leave that one hanging out there. So if any of you have some thoughts onto that question, because we do know that as we continue to reopen or reset, I like that word, Reverend Gatliff, reset it. I think that we have to be sure to understand, in a sense, we'll be pastoring and shepherding two congregations, one in person, one virtually, and that the ideas of membership and attendance will have, the lines will have blurred a bit. And so if there are some emerging thoughts to that question, please feel free to offer them. But also, we know that, and as we've spoken about thus far in this webinar, the pandemic does not respect age or stage, right? We know that it's touched us no matter where we found ourselves. And so Sarita and Jacky, I realize I've been calling you by your formal titles, and we had said we were going to do first names. Sarita and Jacky, can you speak a bit more about the effects of the pandemic on the mental health of children, youth, and families? Specifically, what advice do you have for parents seeking to help their children re-engage in the in-person world, especially as they prepare for a fully in-person school year?
Yeah, one of the hardest things is what the pandemic has done to children. You know, in our generation, we always said, oh, you'll be fine. Children didn't have mental health concerns, but they do. They really, really do. And you know, anxiety has been huge for children and teens. You know, they have social needs as well as just like adults. And so, you know, they have the need to connect. School has been more difficult, but it's just been a lot of challenges. And so I think one of the good things that has come from the pandemic is families have learned to spend more time together and communicate better. And I think that's one of the things that has to continue. Listen to your children, listen to your teens, communicate, find out what things are that do make them anxious, what their concerns are, and spend time really listening to better understand what their needs are. And then watch them, know your children, watch for signs of isolation, watch for signs with the change of who their friend circle is, who they're communicating with on social media. Watch their social media and what they're posting and what they're liking. All of those kinds of things. Watch for signs, unfortunately, of substance abuse. You know, it happens, it's real. You know, so those types of things. Watch the grades and academic success or decline and how that may change. What are their interests? Are they still interested in the same things they've always been interested in? Are they taking interest in new things or things that are not healthy? How are they engaging with their support system, or do they not have a support system anymore? How are they, what does their self-love look like and their self-worth look like? Are they doing a lot of self-criticism and self-critique? Those sorts of things. Are they complaining a lot? Are they, what does loneliness look like for them? You know, and who are they really missing? Who were they attached to that they're missing, and those sorts of things. And then physical signs, you know, signs of headache, signs of stomach ache, signs of pain, complaints about those things could very well be linked to their mental health. So watching for all of those things, but most importantly is communication, listening and allowing them to talk so that you can really understand, I think, what their needs are over the summer, and especially as they prepare to re-engage going back to school in the fall, if schools reopen fully, helping them to understand what that looks like, right? We always talk about a new normal and things going back to normal, but it won't look like it's always looked, and helping them to embrace the newness of what our culture is now and what our culture, pandemic and post-pandemic, is going to be for them, academically, socially, physically, emotionally, and all of those sorts of things. But I think we really have to learn how to listen to their needs and understand that their needs are valid and real, and not blow them off just because they're children. They are children, but they do have mental health concerns, but particularly with anxiety and being able to move forward, self-confidence, self-worth, social support, friend circles, and any types of changes in appetite or sleeping habits. Those are very, very valid and very, very real.
What I would add would simply be that when I've been dealing with, you know, a parent calls and they're concerned about their adolescent or their young child, you know, part of it is I kind of end up kind of rolling back and just realizing that it's really a family, that you have to look at the whole family. That, you know, where is that 10-year-old getting that anxiety? You know, did dad lose his job this year? You know, was there, you know, they hear things. I mean, we were horrified at many of the scenes that we saw in the media this year. I mean, I just right now, those are coming to your head even as I say them. So a 10-year-old, a 6-year-old doesn't have the capacity to even put in, you know, to have any kind of understanding, because we didn't understand it all. So I think what I've been, the good moments for me that I felt good have been where I'm able to kind of pull in the whole family. That's not just the 10-year-old is having that, really what's going on with the whole family. And that actually gives the parents or a parent just the opportunity to say, yeah, I'm not in a good place either. And so that, you know, they're not just individuals together, that together, this is what they're experiencing. So being aware of it that way.
Dorothy and George, I'd love to hear your opinions, especially on that, you know, that last part about how we can, as a church, be partnering with and ministering to the entire family when our children and youth are in crisis.
Just to hitch on to the excellent points that Jacky just made. I'm pretty open in the pulpit about my own struggles with depression and anxiety. It's not the most enjoyable thing I do, but I found it opens a lot of doors to to ministry and to opening people's hearts to listen to the good news of the gospel, that I'm not preaching it at them, but listening to Jesus share it with us both at the same time. And one of the sweetest experiences I've had this year was a little boy. Actually, he's a student at Jacky's school. We have a lot of students at that wonderful school, and he's probably a third grader, maybe a second or third grader. And he heard me say from the pulpit that I battle anxiety. And he had been going through a tough time. He couldn't play with his friends. He wasn't looking forward to school, and all some of those signs that Sarita just mentioned. He's starting to be by himself a little more, couldn't sleep, more worried about things than usual. And his parents asked him if he had mentioned that I had shared that, and he said he'd like to come meet with me. So we met together, we've met a couple of times. And I just told him about my own experience with depression that became clinical in the 3rd grade. And Sarita, I can identify in those days, I had lots of adults saying, what do you have to be worried about? You're just a kid. You don't have nerves. I heard that, people would say, you don't have nerves. The Lord really met me in a powerful way there, but I still have the remnants of that struggle. So I just shared that with him. I don't have any particular psychological insights. I'm not a great counselor, but I can commiserate. And what I noticed in that was, I was trying to think of something clever to say, some coping skills I could help him with. But what happened was he relaxed a bit because he didn't feel alone. And he didn't hear an adult say, you need to get over that. I told him not only about my past experience, but I told him in an age appropriate way, some things that were still causing me stress and anxiety now. And how I had to take them to the Lord. I had to share them with my family. That sometimes I'd write them down in my worry journal, which becomes a prayer journal. And then I can record when the Lord helps me. So you all have made excellent points, especially ones about listening. But I think there's another step too, and it's sharing. It's sharing with our children. And this is tough on me too. Yeah. And I can't handle it by myself. I need friends. I need church. I need the Lord. I need prayer. I need the Bible. And I remember adults doing that for me when I was a kid, struggling with my anxiety, where I didn't feel so alone. And I thought, wow, even adults have tough times like this. It didn't make it all go away, but it enabled me not to be anxious without hope.
Dorothy, is there anything you might want to add to this rich part of our discussion?
It's a very rich conversation. And I think the only thing I would add, as much disruption as our young people have seen in the last year and a half, for families to realize that church is another set of eyes. Sarita made the point that there are some families, for some families, this has been a time of greater togetherness and more conversation. For some families, this has just been a time of stress and anxiety. So whatever the child would already have been feeling, the family's level of anxiety has just piled even more onto that. And so for families to recognize that church is another place, another set of eyes, other people who can help you perhaps see things that are going on with your child and be able to say, Mom, Dad, little Johnny seems really upset. And we just want you to know we're here and we're a resource and we'll help any way that we can. Having opportunities for kids to get together. Now that we're all feeling a little bit better and it's warm outside, we have more opportunities just to even be outside and allow kids to gather together and see one another. I think all those things are just so important for children to be able to start to restructure their lives before going into another school year.
Joshua, can I add something?
Yes, please.
In listening to Jacky and George and Dorothy, I think what we're all trying to say is finding ways to normalize mental health so that we as the church community and communities of faith can help eradicate the stigma associated with it, and letting kids know that it's okay to have these feelings. It's okay to be anxious. It's okay to be depressed or to be sad, and you're not alone, but normalizing so that we can break the stigma so that they feel safe in having these discussions, yes. So that they feel safe in sharing, so that they feel validated and know that they're not alone. But I think as the communities of faith, we are doing better than we've done in past years, but we have to continue to find ways to break the stigma and eradicate all the barriers surrounding mental health And so if that means bringing someone into church to have conversations or to lead these discussions, or whatever it may be, maybe it means bringing in a youth pastor or some young adult who can really identify with these children in an age appropriate way because they're closer in age. All those sorts of things I think are also healthy ways, because we want them to feel safe, and we don't want them to shut down because they feel like this is an isolated feeling that they're having. But like George said in his experiences, normalizing and sharing as adults, what we feel a lot of what they feel, and they feed off of our emotions a lot of times. And so being able to normalize those things becomes really, really important.
Yes, thank you. Those comments and you summarizing all of our comments is a great jumping off for our next question. We can make our responses as nitty gritty or as kind of ethereal as we need to, but what assumptions should form the baseline for faith leaders as they enter this next season of reopening, given the very real impact the pandemic has had on the mental health of members? So what assumptions should form that baseline for faith leaders as we enter into this next season? Don't all respond at once.
I would say, that as somebody has already mentioned, normal, we will never return to normal, and what we've previously known. I doubt that in our generation we will ever quit dealing with the trauma we've all been through, and it's just, it's really been helpful to me to think through the trauma training. I haven't had extensive trauma training, but the bit of trauma training I've received in dealing with women or children who have been sexually traumatized, or those coming back from war with moral injuries, and people, very wise people, training me to be patient with those who have been injured in that way, and to accept that not everything is going to be expressed as what we commonly think of as rational, to be aware of triggers, and to be aware of things that rip off a wound from the past. So I've really had to, it's been helpful. I haven't been as good as I should be in dealing with such matters, but I've had to be mindful in dealing with relational outages, that people are not coming at these issues from a place of deep emotional health. We're all trying to deal with things as very wounded people, including the pastor. I have overreacted. I've gone from A to Z on many things that didn't require it. We're all wounded. We're all traumatized. And extra grace is going to be required in every relationship. I love what Jacky said. We've got to return tenderly. And I'm convicting myself as I say that, because I'm not as tender as I should be, but we are a wounded group, and activities may look very much the same, but we're all, we're post-war victims re-entering.
I couldn't think of a better way to phrase that. People have been affected in so many different ways, and everyone who's returning is someone who's been impacted in a very different way. Some people have been impacted vocationally. Some people have been impacted through isolation and loss of loved ones, and they're grieving the folks who have died without them being present with them. People have just suffered in all kinds of ways. And for everyone to be mindful as we come together, that person sitting next to you has been wounded in a way that you might not even begin to understand. And so that whole notion of how do we tenderly care for one another, we've included all kinds of things in our prayers during this pandemic to try to help remind people week after week after week about how everyone is suffering. But the reality of coming together and knowing that people have all suffered in all of these ways, it is how do we just look at one another with mercy and compassion and willingness to say, I don't know your story for the last year and a half. Perhaps sometime we need to sit down and share our stories from the last year and a half so that we can be in prayer together for how we've been wounded.
And Jacky, you're muted.
Here we go. Yeah, Dorothy, along with what you were saying, what I am really training myself to do and my team, that I'm just saying, when you are with people, it's what we were saying, that you're listening, but you're asking the question, it's really the trauma question. What happened to you this year? And some of those stories you're going to hear, you're just going to try to hold yourself together as you hear what they're going to tell you. But it's holding that as pastors, we're holding that sacredly, and we're listening. The Holy Spirit in us is allowing us to be present in that. But, I'm asking that of the staff, we need to understand that, I say, I'm different, our church is different, our world is different, but just kind of narrowing in, what happened to you this year? And then I think what we're also helping people to do is to reflect on that question themselves. Many people just kind of stumbling through it, but saying, okay, wait a minute, let me think about what did happen to me. How did my life change? How did my faith change? All those kind of different things.
Yeah, I think when you, Joshua, asked about assumptions, I think the assumption none of us can make is that everyone's experience has been the same, right? We all bring something very, very different. And assuming that everyone has had the same experience is a big red flag, and will hurt more people than it will help. And so just sacred space becomes so important, and safe space again becomes so important. Just as we listen and share what we've been through and what other people have been through, I think it's going to be key, like everyone said. But just I'm just, Jacky, I'm loving this word tenderly. I think we're all picking up on it, but just being very tender and compassionate to the stories and to the experiences, to the trauma that others have experienced through the pandemic.
I think we're all going to leave this webinar humming softly and tenderly. Speaking of ourselves, and we broached this topic a bit earlier during our discussion, but I'd love to talk about how leading through this pandemic has impacted the capacity of clergy to lead into this next phase of congregational life. George, you shared your experience with your clergy friend and his journey through his father's death and COVID. And I know each of us have our own experiences leading through the pandemic. And so how has that impacted clergy leaders' ability to lead into this next phase of congregational life?
I meet yearly with two different networks of pastors of similar size churches from across the country, and they're in two or three different denominations. There are about 30 people in each network, and one network met in September, another met in January. In September, we already heard, I think it was a Pew survey that showed that 70% of clergy nationwide were in the midst of changing jobs. They're either looking for a different church, they had been fired from their churches, or they were burned out. And so then in our respective networks, both in September and in January, we asked, in both of those, we share very, very deeply and honestly with each other. We were all going through, as you said, we were suffering in different ways. It wasn't just, I would say that that COVID has been a major issue, but the much more major issue that we were dealing with as a nation, especially as a people of faith, is the racial atrocities that we were witnessing, and then complicated by the extremes within the political atmosphere. And then, if anything, COVID was just keeping us from getting together and dealing with it in a civil and kind way. But we surveyed each of those networks. We just went around the room, and we all had our stories of suffering isolation, suffering depression, but mostly suffering either as victims of racism or as those trying to stand up against it. And every one of us in both of those networks had said we wanted to quit. Not just quit our churches, but just quit the ministry. And for me, and all of us have been in ministry at least 20 years, so we weren't newbies. And the vast majority of us, myself included, had never entertained quitting before. So I think it's really important especially for clergy who have been at it for a while, like us on the panel, to say, as I've said to many younger pastors who are saying, I must not have what it takes. I'm burning out. I'm feeling stressed. I don't want to keep on. And for us as more experienced pastors to say, like I said, we need to say to children, look, this is the hardest time I've ever experienced in ministry. I don't know what to do either. I don't know how to lead through a pandemic and through such divided times myself. I feel like quitting at times. And this is not a time to fake being strong, but it is a time for us to come together and say, as clergy, we need each other. We need to, and we need to, when we get together, not to put up the, here's how, not the window shade smile and here everything's just going hunky-dory but to be real with each other and talk to each other as only clergy understand clergy. And so we need to be there for each other. So I've found it to be a very sweet thing for clergy to come alongside me. I have one man who has texted me, another pastor, who has texted me every Sunday morning at 6:30 for the last 20 years. He just says, here's what I'm preaching on. What are you preaching on? How are you feeling today? How can I pray for you? And I have different friends to whom I go for different things. I have the panic attack team I go to. I have the team I go to when I get the nasty letter. I have the team, we need those lifelines, and it's not a time to put on put on the strong John Wayne face. It's a time to say, man, we need each other, and only the Lord can help us.
Wow, that's powerful. I don't know if there's anyone that wants to add to that truly beautiful answer and just sharing, but I do want to hear other opinions and thoughts if they're out there from you, Dorothy or Jacky or Sarita.
We do need each other. And I think this has been a time that some of us have come together in ways that we had not come together before. And I think some of us have been willing to be vulnerable in ways that we have not been willing to be necessarily vulnerable to one another before. But I think the other thing that clergy need to remember is that there's no shame to us to need help. Navigating. I've had a spiritual director the entire time I've been in the ordained life. And it's important for us to be able to say, we need a place to take it to. We need a place to take our emotions and our grief and our struggles. I was meeting with a bunch of Episcopal clergy colleagues virtually last year during all of the race stuff. And I just realized I could not hold that in anymore. It was just unabashed tears that I had to trust my clergy colleagues with, to just be able to say, I got no more right now. I'm spent. And to be able to trust your colleagues with that.
Yeah, I think all of us have experienced that there is not a lot of glamour in ministry. And, in these perilous times that we are living through now, be it the race pandemic, the corona pandemic, the political landscape we're living in, it's been really, really hard. And ministry can be very isolating. And so if you don't have a support system in ministry, it's even harder. I think statistics on clergy and mental health have been very astounding over the years. I mean, people may be surprised, but the levels of anxiety and depression that come with ministry, the hopelessness, the wanting to quit, the feeling like you're inadequate, all of those things, they're just kind of brought to the surface, specifically in times like these. And so we're human. And I think sometimes we get put on these glass shelves because we are these called out people to lead other people, but it's hard. And so recognizing that we are human and finding those places where we can be human become very, very real because it can be really there is a feeling of really being alone in these struggles and trying to lead. And so I think one of the things that we have to learn to do is practice what we preach and go back to our core. Practice what we preach and live what we try to tell other people to live through the scriptures, and finding something that we can stand on and that affirms us and that recenters us and restores, renews, and revives our spirits and our souls again, because we're human and we have those same emotions and we deal with a lot of the same concerns, if not more, that everybody else does. And so really practicing what we preach and finding that, self-care and places where we can go to just sit and be still and know that He is God. And all of those things become really, really important to our sustainability and to how we grow through this and how we lead through this, and giving us the strength to continue to do what we do, even when we feel like throwing in the towel and quitting.
I think what I would add would be that, yes, letting our congregation know that we're in this with them. I remember, I think it was maybe in September, I finally became honest with some people. And I think and I would say that when the pandemic started, like that April and May, every night as I'm going to sleep, trying to pray, all I could say was, Jesus, I'm scared. And because we just didn't know. And it just, where is this going? But Jesus, I'm scared. And that, that was all I had, that was it, and then I think that we all have come, I'm sure of this, that we've all had to take a hard look at how we were doing ministry and realizing how limited we really are. Like when, George, I remember when I was walking at Shelby Farms when I got the message about your associate pastor dying. And I knew that situation. I knew he was alone, and that just destroyed me. I mean, I just collapsed on the side of the path. and then realize, oh my goodness, we're in for a ride here. I don't know how we're going to do this. And then it was just, people would call me at church saying that somebody, their parents in ICU alone, and it was always the alone word. And I really had to wrestle with that. And it is like going back to the core, what do we believe? Was God present there or was he not? And so, I really had to wrestle with that and say, you weren't with him, but they were not alone. And so that just shaped the way I would pray for people. And, I think I'm hoping that sticks with me, how I pray for people, knowing that my presence isn't necessarily going to change a whole lot being there. It's going to be comforting for a moment. But do I really trust that God, by his Holy Spirit, is in fact filling that room, and the nurses and the providers that are there, are they in fact going to be the hands and the presence of God in ways that family couldn't be, that I couldn't be? So I think that it really is kind of a resetting for us in ministry. How are we going to be doing this differently? I'm very aware now of what my limits are in terms of what I can do, but also very aware of what God is doing, in spite of what my limits are.
Yeah, I'm trying to resist it, but the preacher in me hears the old song, "No, never alone. No, he promised never to leave me alone." Coming to the end of our time, and there's a question in the Q&A. We're going to get to that offline, but I'd love to hear as quickly if you can, where are you guys? I'd love to leave on a positive note of where you're finding hope during this season. Where each of you is finding hope.
I find hope that we've made it.
Yeah.
It hit me a few weeks ago, the first week that we allowed people to not wear the mask if they'd been vaccinated. And we had been singing for a little bit with our masks. But when we sang that first hymn and I heard the people's voices and I looked around, it was just more than I could take. I just realized we made it. And we made it by God's grace. We're scarred, we're beaten up. Not everybody is here.
Mm-hmm.
Some are in the church triumphant, but the church is still alive, and that Christians are still believing in the gospel. And we are, John Calvin in our tradition said, the faith sometimes seems like it's completely extinguished, the flame of faith, but it's always smoldering underneath the ashes, and it'll burst forth again in time. And my hope, the hope I feel is a realized hope, that when I went to bed every night, like all of you did, just like Jacky's saying, I am scared to death and I don't know what to do. But my eyes are on you.
Yeah.
And here we are. We're not, but the Lord has sustained us.
Well, so you guys finding hope?
I think I find hope in just having hope against hope, just holding on to what I know and believe, because hope is the one thing that no pandemic can take from me. And so I hold to that, and knowing that God is an ever-present help, and that he has extended so much grace. I'm just grateful. So I find hope in just so many things, and just having gratitude for still being here, for peace of mind, for, all the things that God has really done. Even in the midst of this pandemic, God is still God.
Yeah.
And he never fails. He knows everything we're going through. And so I find hope just in going back to my foundation, and finding those moments where I can really hold to God's unchanging hand in the midst of all of this, and in my community, you know, just spending time, even if it's virtual, with people I love and people who I know love me, where I can be Sarita, where I don't have to be Reverend, Doctor, Chaplain, none of that, but just be me, is where I find hope and restoration.
I think, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Jacky.
I was going to say the whole arc of the scriptures that we love tells from almost opening pages till the end that God is a rebuilder and a restorer. And so those are the words. And so, you know, I'm with you, George. We were knocked down, but we're standing. Some of us aren't here. I had a beautiful moment Sunday where there was a woman came up to me, an older woman, and and before I even started talking, I said, "Wow, she looks gorgeous." And she's standing in front of me, and she looked at me and she said, you don't know who you don't remember me. You don't remember me. Well, and I did. I just kind of froze. I was like, help me. And then she told me her name, and I was just stunned, because the last time I had seen her was February before the pandemic, where she was seriously ill, didn't think she was going to make it. I was going out to the Germantown Hospital every day to be with her and her family. And then there she was. I mean, she looked gorgeous, just beautiful. I mean, and then I had to step in and lead worship, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is real. This is real what God does, you know? And it was just it was just a tender, beautiful moment that God does restore.
And Dorothy.
Well, I think that some of the imagery that I shared with our parish family at the very beginning of this was imagery from Jeremiah, building and planting, to your point, Jacky, that this may be like the exilic world, and we are called in the place where we are to try to build and plant and grow and find our way. And I think I take hope from the fact that, one, we've seen new people, new faces who are growing with us. Two, we have found new ways as a parish family to continue to grow together, to take care of one another, to reach out to the community beyond us. Lots of beautiful, wonderful things have happened even in the midst of the strife. And that's where I take hope, is that we've not lost sight of who God is and what God calls us to be. We may be a little bit bruised and battered, and we may be trying hard to get our roots in this new soil where we have found ourselves, but we're still here. We're still here.
We are still here. With that, we are going to end our discussion. Again, you can continue to stay plugged in on what we've discussed during this webinar. You'll be receiving an email with a link to the recording, as well as a summary of what was discussed. You can dig into previous webinars on the churchhealth.org website, and continue to stay in contact with us by subscribing to our e-news. Let us close our time in prayer and then continue on with this day. Let us pray. God of all grace, and indeed God who deserves all the glory, we give you thanks for what our eyes have seen, our ears have heard, and indeed what our hearts have felt. We give you thanks that your grace continues to surround us and claim us and sustain us for the uncertainty that lies ahead. And we ask now that you would continue to encourage us, continue to spark in us that smoldering fire of faith, that we might do more, love more, and just rest in the assurance that being with you is enough. Go with us now. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Amen. Thank you all to all of our attendees who have listened in on this discussion. Thank you again to our panelists for your time, your experience, your sharing, and your expertise. And I pray everyone has a great rest of their Tuesday afternoon.
Thank you, Joshua. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Yeah, absolutely.